All right, so today we're continuing through these small called articles, and this is number 6, concerning the sacrament of the altar. For the rest of us, this is talking about the Lord's Supper or communion or the Eucharist. Like, it has a bunch of different names. We typically call it communion at Edgewater. If you're not part of Edgewater, you might call it something else. And really, he's getting at one core thing, and that is, we maintain that the bread and the wine in the supper are the true body and blood of Christ. And then there's the second line that I think is worth reading to you. It says, and that they are not only offered and received by upright Christians, but also by evil ones. That's going to be important later. So the core of this is, we believe Christ, we take Christ at his word. Christ says, this is my body, this is my blood. So we say, okay, it is. And we leave it at that because he doesn't explain further. And the problem is, when you try, because our temptation as humans is to push and to push and to push. We want an explanation, we want to understand how it works, we want the control that comes with that. And I think there are problems on either side because it's not explained how it works. So one side of kind of the mistake of trying to wrap our head around this is we say, oh, that's only symbolic. Communion is only a symbol. And no, the language is pretty plain. He says, this is my body, this is my blood. He doesn't say, oh, it's kind of like. He doesn't say, oh, it's a symbol of. He says, this is. So we say, okay, it is. But then there's this other side, commonly called transubstantiation is the name of this idea, that it's somehow turned into. It's almost like a magic kind of thing. In fact, this is where abracadabra came from. The Latin phrase for that is part of the words of institution sounds very similar to abracadabra, and it kind of got co-opted as like a magic word. But there's this idea that, you say the words of institution, and now it like magically transforms into the body and blood. Or there's this philosophical idea that like the physical bread and the physical wine are like associated with like a spiritual version of bread and wine, but after the words of institution, they're spiritually associated with the body and blood of Christ. And we don't have evidence for any of that. So the Lutheran belief is to just say what we know. We say, this is his body, this is his blood. If you ask how, we say, well, we don't know. If you ask why, you say, well, because Christ chose to do it that way. And that's where we stand. It's as simple as that. But then there's this important part. It's not only offered to and received by upright Christians, but also by evil ones. And you might recall my devotion from yesterday. We talked about baptism. Everyone's a sinner. Everyone needs it. So like we should give it to infants. But we typically withhold communion until people are older. And you say, well, why are we okay with infant baptism but not infant communion? For one thing, I think once you're a little older, the impact of that much wine on your brain, it gets smaller and smaller. But I'm pretty sure if you were to give that much wine to a baby, there's a potential for developmental issues. I don't know what it is, but I'm sure there is one. So there's that aspect of it. But then there's a warning in Scripture, and you'll find this in 1 Corinthians, about taking communion unworthily. There's no such warning about baptism. You can't receive a baptism unworthily. But there's this warning about communion, so we're a little more careful about communion because you don't want to take it unworthily and risk spiritual harm on yourself. So that's the reason we kind of hold, and the line for communion, and this is for me, and this kind of comes from a professor who I hold a great deal of respect for, is once you are old enough to kind of get what's going on and not to giggle at the idea of eating Christ's body and blood, then we're good. Once you can understand the fact that you're a sinner, that you need forgiveness, once you can grasp these concepts, you can take communion without kind of danger to yourself. But that's kind of a clarification we make, and that's something that makes it a little bit of a different game than baptism is. So if you have comments, if you have questions, if you have concerns, please put them below. And regardless, brothers and sisters, go in peace. Serve the Lord. Thanks be to God.